G'day everyone and welcome to the channel. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's great to have you on board. My name is Mark. I'm a retired Kiwi bloke living here in beautiful Cancun, Mexico. I'm a big rugby fan and that's why I started this YouTube channel just over a year ago. In today's video I'm going to be talking about that game that took place yesterday in Bloemfontein in the Free State between the South African Springboks and Portugal. Portugal ranked number 15 in the world. The South Africans, of course, the Rugby World Cup champions. And it was going to be really interesting to see what happened in this game because Rassie Erasmus, like many of the other head coaches in World Rugby at the moment, taking the opportunity to experiment a little bit with their team and to give some debutants an opportunity to play international test rugby for the first time, and just seeing how they measure up compared to the normal test team that we see for South Africa. For Portugal, this was a fantastic opportunity, playing South Africa at home in South Africa, and you got to love this Portugal team. Every time I've seen them play, they give absolutely 100%. They love playing open running rugby. No surprise there, their head coach is a Kiwi, and it's just great to see these teams getting an opportunity to play against the best teams in the world. And I, for one, want to see more of it because I think it's going to help bring their level of rugby up when they see what they're up against and how their opposition performs. In this case, in the form of South Africa. Before the game got underway today, we saw Holly Davison announced as the referee for the game. First time a female referee had been in charge of an international test match of a South African team. So that was something really good to see. The game opened up in the first minute with a little bit of Manie Libbok magic. Yes, he put a chip kick over the top and just about set Cobus Reinhardt on his way. Reinhardt unfortunately wasn't able to regather the ball and the play was called back, but we saw Libbok, and that's exactly what Manie Libbok can do. He's got that potential, hasn't he, in general play to really ignite a backline and create amazing opportunities. It was going to be interesting to see how his goal kicking went in this particular game. Now we got to the third minute of the game and there was already a big decision on the table here. It was a tackle by Andre Esterhuizen, the massive big inside centre for South Africa, went in and cleaned out Lima from Portugal, put him on the ground, and the TMO wanted to have a look at it, and so did Holly Davison. In the end, they decided that it was a yellow card infringement and that Andre Esterhuizen was going to go off the field for 10 minutes with the card to be reviewed as well to see whether it was going to be upgraded to a red card. It was a pretty bad incident. Lima had to go off on a stretcher, and that's never a nice thing to see in the game of rugby. Now, as is often the case when one of your players leaves the field, the rest of the team pick up their motivation and inspiration a little bit, and that's exactly what Portugal did in the ensuing minutes after Lima had left the field. Portugal were absolutely fantastic. They put on attack after attack heading towards the South African line. They were running the ball from one side of the field to the other. They were penetrating inside the South African 22, and you've got to give Portugal a lot of credit. They came here and they were playing without fear. They were taking the South African team on, and they were asking questions early doors of the South African defence to see whether they were going to be able to hold them out. We got to the 8th minute of the game and I had a bit of a chuckle to myself because there was an altercation between RG Schneemann and 4 of the Portugal players. They were having a little bit of a pushing competition, but it was interesting to see RG Schneemann standing in the middle of these 4 guys and pushing them around and they pushing him around. It was taking on the Viking at your own peril, I would say, for those Portugal players. Anyway, 2 minutes later it was all Portugal and they went in for the first try and the first points of this game. It was a brilliant move. And the ball came out to Dos Santos on the wing and he went over for Portugal. The crowd absolutely erupted from the Portugal side of the stadium, and it was a brilliant thing to see, and it was well deserved from Portugal. They'd put a lot of pressure on the South Africans in that first 10 minutes of the game, and getting that try, it was well executed as well. They really went over and deserved that try, so they were up by 5 points to 0. Cabell came up to take the conversion for Portugal, and he smacked that over as well. So without anyone believing that this was going to happen, Portugal were up against South Africa by 7 points to 0 after just 10 minutes of the game. We got to the 12th minute of the game. Holly Davison stopped the play and we heard from the sideline that Andre Esterhuizen's yellow card was going to be upgraded to a red card, so South Africa were going to be down to 14 men at least for the rest of this game. So that was a big shock to the Springboks, but it was going to be a great test for the remaining players, and particularly the debutants, to see whether they could weather the storm that Portugal was putting on, and to see whether they were able to come back into this game, maintain their focus, keep patient, and start to build the pressure on the Portuguese team. That's exactly what they did. 3 minutes later, they responded with their first try of the game. It was a great play by the South Africans. They kept building the pressure, heading towards the Portugal line with pick and goes from their forwards. And it was that man, Wessels, that went over for a fantastic try to put the Springboks on the board. So the scores were back to 7 points to 5 in favour of Portugal. Well, Manie Libbok missed that first conversion opportunity, and South Africa were trailing at the stage by just 2 points. They didn't have to wait long though, because they went straight back onto attack, and you could all of a sudden feel the momentum in this game changing. The Springboks were getting momentum, they were starting to put more and more pressure, and it was just coming from doing the things that they do so well as a team. The forwards were putting a lot of pressure on, the scrum was working fantastically well for the Springboks, and it was only a matter of time before they were going to be able to convert that, I thought, into some more points. So it was no surprise to me, and probably the 46,000 members of the crowd that were in the stadium, the Toyota Stadium in Bloemfontein yesterday, when Buthelezi went over for the second try for the Springboks in the 18th minute. And it was a good piece of work by all of those forwards that were involved. That put the Springboks out to 10 points to 7. Manie Libbok came up for another conversion attempt, and he missed that one, so he was having a bad day already with the kicking boots. None from 2 after 20 minutes in the game. 21 minutes in, and it was the South African scrum that was starting to really make the difference. And from me, Thomas du Toit was doing a fantastic job in the front row, putting a lot of pressure on his Portugal counterpart, and he was winning opportunities for South Africa. Just 3 minutes later, in the 24th minute, we saw a bit of individual brilliance from the South African fullback Fassi, who got through a gap. He saw an opportunity to put the kick over the top into the red zone for Portugal, and of course that man Kurtley Arendse was chasing the ball, and no one's going to stop him when he gets a chance to score a try inside the goal line of the Portugal team. And that's exactly what Kurtley Arendse did. It was out wide, and a difficult opportunity for Manie Libbok to get the conversion over, but he seemed to like the difficult ones in this game, and he got this one over. So the Springboks were out to 17 points to 7, and it looked like Portugal was starting to fall off in this game. The South Africans were really getting some momentum, and whenever they got the ball, they got through the Portugal defence line fairly easy on a number of occasions. Wait 2 minutes later before South Africa went the length of the field again, and one of their debutant Lucy's, Ben Jason Dixon, went over for a fantastic try to South Africa. So they were really starting to run away with this game, putting a lot of pressure on the Portugal team, and Portugal was starting to understand now what rugby is like at the top level of world rugby. You have to be on your game for the entire time, and defence is a very, very important thing. It wasn't that Portugal wasn't trying. They were trying all right, but the South Africans were too big, too fast, and too creative at this stage of the game. That try in the 26th minute put South Africa out to 22 points to 7. It was an opportunity for Manie Libbok to go for his 4th kick of the day, and he missed this one as well. So he only got 1 out of 4 so far in the game, something that would be worrying Rassie Erasmus for sure, because Manie Libbok has these times where he just doesn't have a good percentage ratio from the kicking tee. 31st minute of the game, and South Africa were piling on the pressure. It looked to me like Portugal were nearly out on their feet. They were looking very, very tired. They were having to make some big tackles. But it wasn't just that, it was the physicality of the South Africans, and any team that have played against the Springboks will know that you have to bring your A game to be able to stay in the game with the Springboks, and they were putting all this physical pressure on Portugal. So Portugal was suffering quite a number of injuries in the first half. They had a couple of players go off, but you could see that the toll of tackling these big South Africans was also having its impact, with a few of the Portugal team players having or looking like a little bit worse for wear as they were running around the field during the last 10 minutes of this first half. 34th minute of the game, and another opportunity unfortunately for the TMO to get involved, and it looked like there had been a croc roll in one of the breakdown situations. So we had a look at it in slow motion, and Kurtley Arendse was deemed to be doing a croc roll on one of the Portugal players, and he was given a yellow card and sent from the field. Portugal weren't done by, and in the 35th minute they had a really good attacking mode heading towards the South African line. The ball was coming out through their back line. It seemed as though they had an opportunity to get close to the South African line, but they gave away a forward pass, and that was a breakdown of that opportunity for the Portugal team. So we had just had a few minutes left before the half-time. Were either of the teams able to make an indentation in the scoreboard before half-time? We're about to find out. Now in the 36 minutes, something a little bit weird happened for me. The Portugal head coach decided to change two of his front row members of the team just a couple of minutes before half-time. I've never seen that before in a game, when two players had been substituted when there apparently was no injury involved, and he sent two new props to come on the field. I think he was thinking the South African scrum was being too dominant, which it was, but seemed to be a bit strange putting them on just before half-time. Anyway, that wasn't going to change things, and it was South Africa who were next on attack and looking very threatening just before half-time. And whilst Manie Libbok wasn't kicking very well in this game, particularly from the tee, he was doing a few magical things in general play, and the next play was set up by him. He got through and gave a wonderful pass to Lekano Arm, who took off towards the try line, and nobody was going to stop him when he went a little bit in and away and got across the line for South Africa. So it was a fantastic try set up by Libbok. Libbok proved me wrong with the conversion attempt. He got that one over. So we went to half time, and South Africa had scored 5 tries to 1 in that first half in a very dominating display, and they led on the scoreboard by 29 points to 7. It was a really good first half of rugby. I thought Portugal really owned the first 10 minutes of this game. They showed some enterprise. They were obviously very passionate, but once the green machine got woken up, they got into their play and they started hammering the Portugal team. There are a few execution lapses from the Springboks, but that's only to be expected when you've got so many new players coming together and finding their combinations and their rhythm. But I thought they did a wonderful job in scoring those 5 tries, putting the game beyond Portugal already at the end of the 40 minutes, but also showing Portugal the physicality that's required to play at the top end of world rugby. And I think Portugal would have learnt a lot just from that first half, and how they have to participate and be technically superior in their scrums, their lineouts, and also all their other set pieces around the field. Can't take anything away from Portugal and the way they were trying in this game. I give them 10 out of 10 for the first half performance. When it came to being committed, they had no fear. They wanted to run the ball at every opportunity, and they do look a very enterprising team, and we've seen them, haven't we, particularly in the Rugby World Cup. When they're playing another team of similar standard, they look very, very impressive indeed. Unfortunately, we could start to see the gap that exists between the team that's ranked number 15 in the world and the world champions. There's quite a bit of a gap there. But again, I stress that I think this is a wonderful thing that these teams get an opportunity to play the best teams in the world, because it really is a spectacle for them and for their fans. The Springboks, I think Rassie would have been pretty happy at half-time. He would have said, get out there and keep doing the same. Make sure we get the execution a little bit better in the second half. A couple of Portuguese players that stood out for me in that first half. Camacho, their halfback, was doing some really good stuff, and he's obviously got some very good skill sets. And Pinto in the forwards as well was doing well in the lineouts for Portugal and making sure that they were having an opportunity to secure their ball. So Dos Santos, of course, scored the try. He looked very good on the wings. He's got a lot of pace, and he never says die when it comes to chasing a ball, which you've got to love in a winger as well. So a couple of good standouts from Portugal in the first half. The South Africans were building into the game. Cobus Reinhardt was doing okay at halfback, although I thought we were probably going to see a change there in the second half. Manie Libbok wasn't doing too well with his kicking in this game, but he was doing well in general play, did a couple of magic things that set up the tries. And I thought Fassi at fullback looked dangerous as well when he got the ball. So the second half got underway, and we saw pretty much a carbon copy of the first half for the first few minutes. Portugal had a little bit of ascendancy in the second half, and it was that man Camacho that I just mentioned at halfback who did a good play to get Portugal off from their line and get a good kick downfield to give them some attacking opportunity. They put a couple of phases together, and by the time we got to the 43rd minute of the game, Portugal looked like they were going to start the second half with a little bit more momentum. Don't forget, they were behind 29 points to 7 on the scoreboard, but they weren't letting that phase them, and they're going to see how far and how deep they could go into the second half against this spirited Springbok team. We got to the 44th minute of the game, and two big things happened at that particular time. We saw Kurt Lee Arendse come back on for South Africa. He'd served his time out for the yellow card, and we saw Sasha Feinberg come on at number 10, so Mani Lebok was sent to the bench. So this was fantastic for me because I was going to see Sasha for a good part of the second half and see what impact he would have on this game. Well, we didn't have to wait long to see Kurt Liarense do something fantastic. He was just on the field for a minute after being off with that yellow card. He got a break opportunity and took off down the field. I thought he was going to score a try, but Dos Santos rushed back for Portugal over the course of 40 metres along with two of his colleagues from his team, and they ended up catching Kurt Liarense, and I never thought I would see that in a game of rugby. He was run down over a 40-minute sprint, which was pretty impressive from the Portugal players. But we didn't have to wait long. That pressure from South Africa continued, and just a couple of minutes later we saw them score a fantastic try on the other side of the field, on the left-hand side, and it was that other winger, Mapimpi, who went over for a great try to South Africa. And what I really enjoyed about this try in the 48th minute from the Springboks was it came from a set piece, and you don't always see this from a Springbok team. And I think this might be the impersonation of Tony Brown coming out here, the All Black coach that's gone in to help Rassie with the backline of the Springbok team. It was a great scrum by South Africa, but the ball went out through the backline, and Mapimpi went over for a textbook try to the Springboks from a set piece. It was a wonderful thing to see at that point of the game. So that was 34 points to 7 at that stage, and Sasha Feinberg was taking his first conversion attempt at goal, and he didn't make any mistake from out wide, so he really took over the kicking responsibilities from Lebok brilliantly and nailed his first kick at goal. 54th minute of the game, and Rassie decided to start ringing the changes. We saw Kobus Reinhardt go off, and we saw Vanderberg come on at halfback, another debutant playing for the Springboks today. Matunu had come on as well in the forwards. He's a big looking beast of a guy, and I was looking forward to seeing how he would go for the rest of the game. We only had to wait 2 more minutes though, and South Africa were on attack again, and it was that man Sasha Feinberg who went through, made a fantastic break, got the ball out to Mapimpi, who went over for his second try in the second half, just a couple of minutes after his first try. So it was a brilliant play by South Africa. Sasha Feinberg showing us the talent that he's got in general play. Absolute superstar, stood up the Portugal defence, had Mapimpi outside him, and there was no doubt that a try was going to be scored. So after 57 minutes of the game, that made the score 41 points to 7. Sasha got the conversion over. South Africa were out to 43 points to 7. But Portugal weren't done with yet, and they were still trying to make a difference in this game. And as I said before, every opportunity they got, they were running the ball, they were putting the South Africans under whatever pressure they could, and they were looking quite good when they were doing it. So when we got to the 59th minute, it was another fantastic piece of work by Portugal, and they went over for their second try, and it was that winger again, Dos Santos, that got the second try for Portugal. A wonderful play down the left-hand side of the field. The ball went out through a couple of the backs. Dos Santos was the last man, and he went over without the Springboks being able to get him in defence. Brilliant try to Portugal. When I looked at the replay of that try, I found out that it was Sasha Feinberg that actually missed the tackle on Dos Santos. So whilst he had done a couple of good things, that was something that Rassie probably put a cross next to his name that he would have a chat to him about after this game, that's for sure. But a great try by Portugal. Nevertheless, the Springboks defence didn't get them, and they were in for a really good try. Cabell got the conversion for Portugal, so we were back to 43 points to 14. And this scoreline was quite significant for Portugal, and I'll tell you why a little bit later in the video. But the Springboks weren't done then, and it was only just a few minutes later in the 64th minute of the game when Kuan Horn, another debutant for the Springboks, went over for his first try in the green jersey, and what a great try it was. Once again, the Springboks going through the hands, making it look very good, getting into a break, and Kuan Horn was the man on the spot to be able to score the try for the Springboks. Sasha was able to nail the conversion, so the Springboks went out to 50 points to 14 after 68 minutes of the game. The play restarted, and just 1 minute later we saw another piece of brilliance from Sasha Feinberg. He put in a brilliant kick that ended up being a 50-22. It was an absolute monster. It looked like a torpedo from the old New Zealand days, or let's say Nas Botha. And it was an absolutely piece of great work from Sasha, and found a huge amount of territory for the Springboks to put them deep in attack again in the Portugal 22. South African forwards kept dominating in general play, so it was no surprise that in the 69th minute we saw Andre Hugo Venter go over and score his first try as a debutant for the South African Springboks. And if you know the name Venter, you'll know that he's the son of a famous South African Springboks. His father was also a Springbok, so I don't think there's been too many father and son combinations for the Springboks, maybe 8 or 9. But Andre Hugo Venter got over and scored a fantastic try for the Springboks. Sasha Feinberg got over the conversion. So we got to the 74th minute of the game, and Portugal were not saying they were done with yet. So they got a fantastic attack going on down into the South African 22. The ball came out and a cross kick across the field to their player Madeira, who ended up going in for a brilliant try for the Portugal team. That try was converted and Portugal had scored 21 points against the Springboks. And it was a fantastic display on what you can do if you keep trying against this World Championship team. Now, despite the Springboks scoring 57 points against the Portugal team up until this stage of the game, we only had a few minutes left and South Africa were not going to be denied another opportunity. It was that man again, Mapimpi, who ended up getting the ball at the end of a great, fantastic South African raid towards the Portugal lines. And Mapimpi went over for his third try of the second half, his third try in the match, and it was a well-deserved try to the Springboks in the end of the game. The Portugal team were just about out on their feet with just 1 minute left to go. So the conversion was successful from Sasha Feinberg, and South Africa were out to 64 points to 21, a huge scoring game between these two teams. Now, during that try-scoring opportunity for Portugal, which they converted, Huan Horn was doing a little bit of an indiscretion off the ball. The referee and TMO saw it and he was given a yellow card. So South Africa were going to end this game with just 13 men on the field, and I'm sure that was something that Rassie Erasmus was going to talk to the team about after the win of this game. So with no time left on the clock, that was it. The final score was 64 points to 21 in favour of South Africa. A great win to the Springboks, but a great game from Portugal, I have to say that. Now just think about this for a minute. In their last games against the Springboks, Wales, Argentina, England and New Zealand have not been able to score 21 points against the Springboks. So this was a fantastic game by Portugal to be able to put 21 points against the world champion. Sure, there was a lot of debutants in the Springboks team, but they still had to score those points and they did it. So hats off to the Portugal team, all of their fans that travelled to South Africa for this game. It was a fantastic thing to see. This was a good game for South Africa. It was a good game for Rassie and his coaching team to see how these debutants went. I think they did pretty well across the field actually, and it's going to be really interesting now as we've got the Rugby Championship coming up to see whether or not Rassie is going to take any of these players and put them in the squad to give them more experience in the Rugby Championship this year. And this is one of the interesting things we've got across World Rugby at the moment, with a lot of these new players who are coming in on the peripherals of the top team, whether or not they're going to be given an opportunity. Because if they're not giving an opportunity now, heading towards the Rugby World Cup, then when are they going to be given the opportunity? So it's going to be interesting to see what coaches pull the ripcord and give some of these debutants the opportunity in the big time against the Rugby Championship competition. A couple of things that stood out for me in this game that I think were important was the way that Portugal started off in that first 10 minutes, put a lot of pressure on South Africa. It quietened the crowd down a little bit in the Toyota Stadium, and it gave that South African team who had lost a player, Andre Esterhuizen, an opportunity to reset, find their patience and take control of the game, and that's exactly what they did. So hats off to the Springboks for doing that. I think they stuck to the task very well. I don't think Rassie's going to be very impressed with the discipline of the Springboks throughout this game. And when you think about it, Portugal were actually the team that was under pressure all the time in this game, and yet they had no yellow cards. They had no disciplinary issues. Yes, they had a couple of penalties against them, but I think Portugal did very, very well in this game when it came to discipline. They could have easily had a yellow card in this game if they'd lost their plot, but they didn't. In fact, it was South Africa that lost players in this game. So that's something that I think Rassie's going to take a look at and ask the players about their discipline and why did this happen in this particular game. There was probably no need for it, but it did happen. So South Africa scored 29 points in the first half. They scored 35 points in the second half, and Portugal scored more points in the second half than they did in the first half. So both teams did well in the second half, and that was interesting to see. We did see that the Portugal bench unfortunately had to be used early in this game because of the injuries they were incurring, so they didn't really have the emphasis at the end of the game that they probably would have liked, yet they still did score that try in the 74th minute of the game, so it was a very good effort on their behalf. I think the South Africans used their bench very well in this game. They gave the opportunity to Sasha Feinberg to come on early in the second half, and for me he was way better than Manie Libbok. I'd like to hear all the South Africans' comments on that one. And where do you sit now on your number 10s? Because Andre Pollard obviously is your Rock of Gibraltar, and then you've got Sasha, who's coming in and just showing what kind of brilliant player he really is. So a lot of good players. Andre Venter was also good for the Springboks. Thomas du Toit was a standout for me. I thought he did very, very well, and the rest of the Springboks pack did a good job as well. As I continue to say in my videos, the Springboks' depth of talent is scary for all teams around the world. They could probably put another team together as well that could do just as well against the likes of Portugal. But it was a brilliant game of rugby from both sides. We saw good things on both sides that are going to give both coaches a good feeling as they move forward. Now, next up for the Springboks, they're going to go into the Rugby Championship. We've got a bit of a break for a few weeks now while the teams get ready for that. The announcements around the squads are going to be interesting. I'm going to be covering all those here on Inside Rugby with Mark, so please come back and check out those videos as I make them. Also, plenty other videos coming from all sorts of things that are happening within the rugby world, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you've enjoyed this post-game video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and a like as well. I'd really appreciate that. Okay, well that's it for this particular video. Thanks very much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it, no matter where you are in the world. Stay safe, stay well, keep enjoying your rugby, and I'll be back again really soon with some more content. Until that time, it's time to say adios from beautiful Cancun in Mexico. I'll see you all again very soon. Bye for now.